In the previous lecture, you understand how class method and static method are created in Python. Now let's take a look at what is iterator is. Iterate means to repeat something several times. Until now, I have iterated over only sequences and dictionaries in for loops. But the truth is that you can iterate over other objects too. Objects that implement the iter method. They are elegantly implemented within for loop, comprehension, generators, etc. Iterator in Python is simply an object that can be iterated upon. An object which will return data one element at a time. Technically speaking, the Python iterator object must implement two special methods, iterate and next, collectively called the iterator protocol. The iterate method going to return an iterator, which is any object, and then we have a next method. When you call the next method, the iterator should return its next value. We use this next method to manually iterate through all the items of an iterator. When we reach the end, it will raise the stop iteration exception. Now, let's take a look at a very simple example to understand how iterator work in Python. So here I'm going to simply create my list and specify some numbers to it. Now, once I have this list, I'm going to just iterate it. So I'm going to just use here iterate function. So down here I'm going to say iter. So I'm going to call this function iter and then pass my list here. And this method is going to return an object. So we need to get this object using a variable. So I'm going to store this object in the variable my iter, just like this. So once I have this object, I can iterate over all these numbers. I'm going to just call here print, and then here I'm going to call next function. As I said earlier, next function is used to iterate through all the items of an iterator. Now this function is going to iterate over all these items one by one using this object. When I specify this list parameter to this iterate as an argument, this iterate function is going to return an object. In that object, I'm going to have all these values, and I can access all these values one by one using this next function. So now to this next function, let me just pass this my iterate object. Now let me just execute this file and show you the result. When I execute this file, I'm going to have 4 as a result. Let me just duplicate this statement and execute this file. I'm going to have 7 as a result. Let me just duplicate it. I'm going to have 0 and 3 as a result. So using this next function, I'm going to get these values one by one using iterator object. Now, once you understand how iterator function can be used in Python, let me just show you how you can build your own iterator in Python. Building an iterator from scratch is easy in Python. We just have to implement the iterator and the method function. Let me show you. Let me just get rid of this statement and let's start with the class giver. So I'm going to say here class, specify name for this class, power. I'm using this class to get the power of a number. So I'm going to specify power as a name for this class, and then I'm going to define a constructor here. So here I'm going to say define init, and in this init method I'm going to just pass a parameter. So right here I'm going to pass parameter max, and I'm going to specify default value to this max parameter. To specify default value to this parameter, I can specify here equal to sign and specify 0. So using this technique, you can specify default value to any of your method parameters. Down here, I'm going to say self.max. I'm going to create a class instance and then specify this max value here. So now this class instance have this 0 value. Now just out of that, down here, I'm going to implement the iterator method. So here I'm going to say define, specify double underscore and specify here iterator. So you just need to implement this iterator method in the class. Once I implement it, let me just specify here self.n. So I'm going to create an instance here of the class, and then I'm going to specify equal to sign and then specify value 0. Now just for that, as you know, this iterator method is going to return an object. So we need to return an object with this iterator method. So here I'm going to say return self. So I'm going to return a class instance with this iterator object. Just for that, as I said earlier, you need to implement two methods, iterator and next. The iterator method returns the iterator object itself. If required, some initialization can be performed. Just for that, I'm going to implement the next method. So down here, I'm going to just define a next method. So I'm going to specify double underscore, then specify next, just like this. Now keep in mind, you don't have to specify your own name to these methods. We are implementing the predefined method in Python, so we don't have to specify our own name here. I'm implementing the iterator and this next method. So I'm going to use the same name here. In this method, I'm going to say if self.n is less than or equal to self.max. So here I'm going to create a condition if self.n. It means if this 0 is less than or equal to this max value, I'm going to execute this if block. So here I'm going to create if block, and in this if block I'm going to say result. I'm going to create a variable result is equal to 2, then specify double asterisk, and then specify self.n. So using this asterisk, I'm going to get the power of this n and store it in this result variable. Down here I'm going to say self.n plus and equal to 1. I'm going to just increase the value of this n by 1. Just after that, down here I'm going to say return result, and in the else part I'm going to just raise stop iteration exception. So when the object reach at the end, I'm going to just call this stop iteration exception. Now let me just call this instance of this class. So down here I'm going to just simply say numbers is equal to power, and as you know, we have this parameter to this constructor, so we need to pass value here. So I'm going to say here 3, and then let me just call the iter function. So here I'm going to say I is equal to iter, and then specify number here, just like this. And just out of that, I'm going to say here print next and pass I here, the iterator object. When I execute this file, you can notice I'm going to have 1 as a result. Now let me just duplicate this statement just like this. When I execute this file, I'm going to have 1, 2, and 4. Now let me just explain this code first. I'm going to create a class power to get the power of a number, and then I'm going to just create a constructor of it. I'm going to pass parameter max and specify default value 0 to this max parameter. In this method, I'm going to create a simple class instance and then specify name to it n and specify value 0. And then I'm going to return this class instance. Just after that, I'm going to implement this next method. In this method, I'm going to say if self.n means 0 is less than or equal to this max value, I'm going to execute this if block. At this point, I specify here 3. So this is going to check if 0 is less than or equal to 3. It's going to return true because 0 is less than 3. So it's going to execute this if block. And in this if block, I'm going to have result is equal to 2, then specify here power operator, and then I'm going to specify self.n and store the result in this result variable. Then I'm going to add 1 inside this n value. Just after that, I'm going to return this result. So when I execute this program and call this next function, it's going to first print 1, then print 2, then print 4, and when I call the next again, I'm going to have 8 as a result. So it's going to multiply these values one by one. Now what if I try to duplicate this statement again and execute this file? I'm going to have an error message because as you can notice, I specify here 3. Now the iteration of this method is going to happen only 4 times because I specify here 3. I started this iteration from 0 and end at 3. When I try to access the 5th value, I'm going to get an error message. So this if condition is going to return false and execute this else part. Let me just specify here 4 and try to execute this file. When I do that, you can notice I'm going to have 16 as a result. So this iteration is now executed at least 4 times. So this is how you can implement your own iteration with iterate and next method. If this program makes complication in your mind, then just skip it. I will explain all these in the future lectures. Don't make complication in your mind while learning anything. So I hope you understand how iterate and next function work in Python. In the next lecture, we're going to move to the next topic of Python. Till then, I will see you in the next one.